Hi, I'm Gordon from Camera Labs, and this is my review of the Panasonic Lumix GH7, a high-end camera based on the Micro Four Thirds system, aimed at hybrid shooters and videographers. And before you ask, yes, it now has phase detect autofocus. Announced in June 2024, the GH7 comes 2 years after the GH6 hit the shops, and it shares the same launch price of $2,200 or £2,000 for the body alone. New features again include phase detect autofocus for the first time in the GH series, internal ProRes RAW video up to 5.7K, enhanced subject recognition, and, with the optional XLR2 accessory, 32-bit float audio recording. The GH7 also inherits Frame I/O proxy recording and enhanced video stabilization from the latest S5.2 updates, along with real-time LUTs and compatibility with the Lumix Lab app from the recent S9. These all join a core feature set from the earlier GH6, which includes 4K 120, OpenGate 5.8K up to 30p, and unlimited recording times thanks to the built-in cooling fan. Panasonic briefed me online and loaned me a sample to test. Even though it was described as pre-production, it behaved during all of my tests so far, so let me show you around it and demo the new features. Starting with design, the GH7 shares essentially the same body as the GH6 before it, a satisfyingly chunky camera with a decent grip that feels good in your hands. As before, the drive mode dial is on the upper left side, while a lockable mode dial is on the right with a power collar around it. Behind the soft touch shutter release is a finger dial and 3 dedicated buttons for white balance, ISO and exposure compensation. These are joined by an information button and a red record button, which requires a firm push to start and stop recording. Finally, there's a thumb dial in the upper corner. Meanwhile, on the rear are a collar switch and button for adjusting the AF area and the AF mode, an AF on button, an 8-way joystick, and a flat thumb wheel. Oh, and there's also a second record button on the front of the camera in the lower right corner. It all works together very well, and I wonder if Panasonic will recycle this body or parts of it for a future flagship full-framer. After all, the G9 II and S5 II now share the same body design. The GH7 also inherits much the same viewfinder as the GH6, a 3.69mm OLED, but now quoting a fractionally larger 0.8 times magnification. Either way, the 4x3 native shape of Micro Four Thirds means the viewfinder image fills the entire panel height when shooting photos or OpenGate video, which in turn delivers an impressively large and immersive view. Moving on to the monitor, the GH7 also inherits the 3-inch 1.84mm touchscreen of the GH6 with its cunning articulated mechanism. This includes a side hinge for flipping out to the side and twisting forward to face you or back on itself for protection. But this entire mechanism is also mounted onto an upper hinge which allows the screen to tilt vertically upwards in 2 stages without flipping out to the side first. This is not only faster but remains in line with the optics, and also allows the screen to stay nice and clear of any connections, even when flipped out sideways. Like the GH6, the screen mechanism is also pushed outwards by the active cooling system, which includes a barely audible fan and vents on either side. Panasonic still claims the body remains dust and splash resistant though, as well as operating down to temperatures of -10 Celsius. The benefit of active cooling is unlimited recording times, and in my test the GH7 matched the GH6 in this regard. When set to 4K 30p, I managed 88 minutes on a full charge before the battery ran out without any overheating warnings. To really push the GH7 though, I connected it to USB power with my Apple MacBook Pro charger. I popped in my largest 512GB memory card and managed almost 7.5 hours worth of recording before it stopped because it ran out of space. This clip was split across 3 files, 2 at 3 hours each, leaving the last at about an hour and a half, and again, no overheating issues. Speaking of memory cards, the GH7 has 2 card slots, one for CF Express Type B and the other for SD. As before, CF Express is required for video bit rates above 600 megabits per second, which means most of the All-I or ProRes options above 1080p. But if you're happy with H.264 or 265 compression, you should be able to record pretty much any of the video resolutions and frame rates to SD cards. For access to larger and cheaper storage, the GH7 is also compatible with USB SSD drives from day one, which can be connected directly to the USB-C port. I tried it with a SanDisk Extreme Portable 1TB drive, and once USB SSD was enabled in the menus and the drive formatted, the camera reported a huge 14 hours worth of 4K 30p available, or over 10,000 photos. Of course, you'd need external power to record video for that long, and since the USB-C port is already occupied by the drive, you're going to be looking for a dummy battery adapter. You'll also have to be careful how the drive is mounted, unlike the balancing act that I've done here. Restrictions aside though, it's still great to be able to record directly onto external SSDs as they're large, fast, fairly cheap, and connect directly to most computers without the need to have a card reader. I'm also pleased to report the GH7 inherits the Frame I/O and proxy options recently added to the S5 II and 2X models. This allows the GH7 to record a low bitrate proxy file to the SD card, while the original file is recorded to CF Express or an external SSD. The latter is particularly welcome since the dual slot menu options for backup or overflow become unavailable when an SSD drive is enabled. In terms of ports, the left-hand side is home to 3.5mm microphone and headphone jacks, each with their own flaps. Below these are the USB-C port and a full-size HDMI jack. Sadly, like other recent Lumix bodies, the USB-C port still won't work as a standard USB webcam without a driver. But making up for this somewhat is the ability to stream directly from the camera without the need for a computer in between. Connect the GH7 to Wi-Fi or tether it over USB direct to a mobile phone, and you can broadcast directly to YouTube Live or other RTMP compatible services. This was first implemented by Panasonic and the GH5 II, and I demoed it in my review of that camera. As for the HDMI jack, this can be set to output raw video to Blackmagic or Atomos recorders in 5.8K open gate up to 30p or 5.7K in 17:9 up to 60p. Although again, a key upgrade of the GH7 is being able to record ProRes RAW internally, which I'm going to talk about in a moment. Like the GH6, the FlashSync port on the front doubles for timecode output, with Panasonic supplying a BNC adapter in the box. Meanwhile, the hot shoe on top can be used to connect the optional DMW XLR2 audio interface, which supports dual XLR and single 3.5mm microphone inputs and supports 4-channel recording. So far so similar to the previous model, but what makes the XLR2 really special is additional support for 32-bit float recording, which in theory provides so much dynamic range it's impossible to saturate. Okay, so now I'm filming with the Lumix GH7 fitted with the XLR2 microphone accessory, and I've got my Rode shotgun microphone here, which is normally pointing down at me from out of shot, but I want to show you the distance here, connected to the 3.5mm input on that adapter, and I've set the menu to be recording 48 kHz 32-bit float. And when you select 32-bit float, it disables things like the audio recording levels, so it should be recording all of them. So let's put that to the test. Sorry, this is going to sound a bit grim at first, but let's see if we can recover it. Right, now I'm speaking very loudly right into the microphone. This would be horribly distorted, but it's an example of how hopefully I should be able to recover this sound with 32-bit float. I think Panasonic describing the GH7 as having internal 32-bit float is a bit of a push though, as it does require this external accessory, and after all you could enjoy 32-bit float with a variety of alternative sound recorders. But in its defense, the XLR2 accessory is allowing the GH7 to record that 32-bit audio track internally as part of a video file, thereby eliminating the need to copy and synchronize a separate track from a recorder later. And finally, the GH7 is powered by the DMW BLK22 pack, which as I mentioned earlier is good for about an hour and a half of standard 4K video. Also note the tripod lock pin hole in front of the thread under the camera. Moving on, I believe the GH7 employs the sensor which made its debut in the G9 II, making it the first model in the GH series to sport phase detect autofocus, and in fact only the second Lumix G model to do so. I've got loads of examples in just a moment, but first let's look at the photo quality, as yes, you can use the GH7 to take pictures. The 25.2 megapixel sensor records photos with a maximum resolution of 5776 by 4336 pixels in the native 4:3 shape of the 4/3 format. Cropped versions in 3:2, 16:9 or 1:1 are also available, albeit none of the super wide panoramic options that are seen on the full frame models. There's 2 levels of JPEG compression, 3 low resolutions, and the chance to record RAW files, although like the G9 II, there's no RAW compression options, nor the option to switch JPEG to HIF. Here's my standard Brighton peer view taken with the GH7 and 12-60 at 12mm for a 24mm equivalent field of view. Taking a closer look shows a good level of detail in bright conditions at lower ISOs. Obviously, as the ISO is increased, the smaller sensor will begin to fall behind larger formats, but in my tests, it's cleaner than you might expect. Plus, there's plenty of bright lenses and decent IBIS in the body to help keep the ISOs low. I'll include some samples in my review page at cameralabs.com if you'd like a closer look. The GH7 also inherits a pixel shifting high-res mode, which exploits IBIS to capture a burst of images with the sensor slightly shifted between each one. These can then be combined in camera afterwards to generate a potentially more detailed image. So here's that peer view again, but this time on the left I'll show you the single frame 25 megapixel version, while on the right is the high resolution composite version. Like all pixel shift composite modes, there can be artifacts around any subjects that might be in motion during the capture time, like people, birds, water, even foliage, but where the subject is static there can be an impressive boost in detail. And unlike most companies, Panasonic is generating this internally and not forcing you to make the composite on your computer later. Okay, now for autofocus, and I'm filming the back of the screen as connecting an external HDMI recorder can still have an impact on autofocus for still photos on Lumix bodies. You're looking at the 12-60 at 25mm 3.5 here with AFC, where the camera is using phase detect autofocus. Now that's pretty easy, so let's switch to the old Leica DG 25mm 1.4, wide open of course, where in AFC mode you can see the refocusing confidently lands on the subject without hunting. Out of interest, here's the same lens in single AFS mode, where I believe the camera still uses DFD technology, and you can see for this particular old lens it's actually a bit quicker, despite the brief wobble to confirm. DFD, for all its complaints on YouTube, is still a good technology for single autofocus photos. Still too easy? Okay, how about the old Olympus 75mm 1.8, wide open here in AFS mode again, where the confirmation wobble is a bit more pronounced, but the focusing is still swift. And now if I switch the GH7 to continuous AFC mode, you'll see that the hunting has been eliminated, but again for this older lens, the refocusing speed has reduced. Now this is more down to the age of this lens though, as more modern lenses do focus very quickly in either AFS or AFC modes, making them practical for capturing action, sports and wildlife. I'm going to show you autofocus for video in just a moment. The GH7 also sports upgraded subject detection over previous models, including the updated S5 II. So, along with allowing you to choose between human, animal, car, bike, train and plane, the GH7 lets you drill down further to specify actual target parts. For a human or animal, that would be eyes, as we've seen before, but for cars and bikes you can now also choose between the front of the vehicle or bike, or the helmet of the driver or rider. And for trains and planes, you can choose either the whole object or again the front of it. In practice it works too, although I'd still like to see an auto option that attempts to detect the actual type of subject in a more dynamic situation, even if it means reduced accuracy. Canon and Fujifilm have proven that this is possible. But either way, here's a burst of shots taken with the 12-60 at 60mm f4 for a 120 equivalent using the mechanical shutter at the top speed of 10 frames per second when using continuous autofocus. If you can use AFS, this can be boosted to 14 frames per second. Like other new Lumix cameras, 4K and 6K photo have long gone, but fast electronic bursts and pre-burst options are available on the GH7. Here's a sequence I took in the pre-burst mode at 20 frames per second with a half-second buffer, where I fully pushed the shutter button as the bird took flight. But here you can see the pre-burst mode has allowed the camera to buffer and record 10 frames prior to takeoff, allowing you to capture the exact moment that you desire. Moving on to video, the GH7 becomes the most capable Lumix G movie camera to date, building upon the quality and features of the GH6 with more confident autofocus, improved stabilization, and the chance to record internal ProRes RAW. Yep, internal ProRes RAW. As with previous GH models, there's a vast array of movie options which I'll briefly discuss while scrolling through just the MOV modes when the camera's set to NTSC. You can film 1080 from 24 to 240p, 4K or Cinema 4K from 24 to 120p, along with a variety of anamorphic and open gate modes, with the best quality 5.8K available up to 30p and recording the full 4x3 sensor area. You'll also see there's 8-bit and 10-bit options and the choice of long GOP or all-I encoding for most of these modes. Okay, enough of these menus, now for some actual footage that I filmed with the GH7 and 12-60 lens, which I'm going to keep at 12mm so you can compare coverage. You're looking at 1080 30p here, where the view's uncropped widthways compared to standard 4x3 shaped photos. And next at 1080 60p, where the coverage is again the same. You're also still getting full subject recognition with continuous autofocus up to 60p. Now for 1080 at 120p, still uncropped and still with continuous autofocus, albeit now without subject detection, so you're looking at just using standard AF areas from 100p upwards. And now for the top frame rate of 1080 at 240p, where the coverage may remain unchanged, but there is now a visible drop in quality. I also lost continuous autofocus in this mode with only single AF available, while on my oldest lenses it became manual focus only. You are still recording sound in this mode though. So 1080 240p is best reserved for static subjects, like those times when, you want to drop a brick into a flower pot full of water. Or if the depth of field is sufficient for continuous AF not to really matter, it can also be used to capture slow motion sporting action, like this wakeboarding. In both examples I'm filming in 240p and slowing them down by 8 times for my 30p timeline, although if your project is in 24p you could be enjoying a 10 times slowdown. Okay, now back to my 1080 30p clip of the pier before switching to 4K at 30p where there's a visible step up in detail. Note that all of these clips were filmed with fast shutter speeds as it was outdoors without a filter, so the motion is going to look a bit jittery, but this test is all about detail. Next for 4K 60p, still with sound, the same coverage and full subject detection with continuous AF available. And now for 4K at 120p, still maintaining the same quality and coverage, but like 1080, anything above 60p loses subject recognition and you'll need to use standard AF areas. You do at least still get continuous AF and sound. Here's some footage I filmed in 4K 120p of Steven Seagal and his extended family enjoying a flap around the beach. I've slowed this by 4 times on my 30p timeline here, and the results can look pretty good, although do beware of using the digital stabilization set to high, as I found that it could produce some visible jitters when slowed down. Standard digital or IBIS by itself though looked fine. And now back to 4K at 30p before switching to the top quality of 5.8K, also at 30p, where the result on this 16:9 4K timeline looks identical. But the file does contain more detail than 4K, and that can allow me to zoom in a bit or crop in post. 5.8K is also in the open gate format, where the camera records the entire sensor area, and in the case of 4/3 cameras that's in a 4:3 shape. So as I shrink the video, you'll see how much taller it is than standard 16:9, and this provides great flexibility in post for generating both wide and tall content from the same footage. For example, here's the same clip shown twice in the 4:3 open gate format. Now I'll crop both of them into landscape on the left and portrait or vertical on the right, where it's clear how the latter is enjoying the extra height captured by the sensor. I personally use open gate for clips that I intend to use for both landscape and portrait formats, and on Micro Four Thirds it's particularly useful as the 4:3 shape is even taller than the 3:2 shape of full frame and APS-C models, and this alone could make the GH7 more desirable than those other cameras if you regularly make videos that have to look like that and that. Before moving on, you won't find the excellent hybrid zoom of the recent S9 on the GH7, which exploits the full sensor resolution to seamlessly extend the range of a zoom without losing out on the full wide end. Maybe there's some sort of issue implementing it on Micro Four Thirds. I'm not sure, but I do hope that they can resolve it as it is a useful feature. Now for video autofocus, and just as an appetizer, here's a handheld clip with the old 25 1.4 showing how easily the GH7 can now refocus from near to far with a single AF area, and this was in pretty low light too during dusk. Let's now switch to a more formal test with my usual bottle against a brick wall, filming 4K 30p, first with the 12-60 at 25mm 3.5, where you'll see the confident refocusing back and forth with no overshooting. For something a bit more challenging though, how about the Leica DG25 1.4 again, wide open, and again showing nice and smooth focus pulls back and forth without any hunting. This is why we've been asking for phase detect for so long. And to prove it's not just limited to 30p, here's the same test at 25 1.4 in 4K at 60p. And again in 4K 120p, where I'm going to play it back 4 times slower than normal to show how the focus pulls stop just as soon as they reach the subject. As noted earlier, you still get continuous AF and sound in 4K 120, but without subject recognition, but it's fine for this single area test though. I'm not going to bore you here with all of my 1080 tests, but they also worked fine from 24 to 120p, although again at 200 to 240p, you're only going to be getting single AF at best, and on some really old lenses like my 25 1.4, you're only getting manual focus. Static subjects are easy though, so how about one that's moving? So here I am, filmed in 5.8K 30p with the 25 1.4 wide open, where you can see the GH7 not only refocusing on me as I move, but staying locked on once I pause. I was using face and eye detection here. And for a tougher test, here's the Olympus 75 1.8, again wide open, and while this older lens is a tad more leisurely to refocus, it's still getting to where it needs to be smoothly and confidently without hunting or wobbling. And for those who need bokeh blobs to really tell what's going on, here I am indoors with the 25 1.4 again, and I'd like you to pay attention to the size of the blobs in the background. Sorry, I'm very close to the camera at times, but I really wanted to generate the biggest bokeh blobs that I could. Again, the refocusing on the 25 1.4 may not be as smooth as the latest lenses for video, but the important part here is seeing the size of the blobs remains fixed when I stand still. You may recall the wobbling or fluttering of previous Lumix bodies which relied on DFD only, but now Phase Detect AF has put those demons to rest. And if you prefer non-human subjects, here's a dog enjoying a nice stroll along the seafront, filmed in 4K 60p where the subject recognition is still supported. I've slowed it by 2 times here on my 30p timeline. I did however notice a drop in accuracy above 60p when the subject detection becomes unavailable, with faces and eyes not always being as sharp as they could be. At these frame rates, try to use a single area and position it carefully over the part of the subject that you'd like to be the sharpest. Now for stabilization, with the GH7 sporting not just IBIS sensor shift, but some of the most effective digital compensation around right now. Let's start with a clip filmed with the Olympus 75mm, so that's 150mm equivalent on this body, without any stabilization first, where the result is of course wobbly. Next for IBIS alone, where the view has become much steadier. Remember, this lens has no optical stabilization of its own, so this is just IBIS you're looking at. And now for IBIS with standard digital movie stabilization, which takes a small crop to deliver more stable footage. You can see this begin to lock on as I recompose. And next for IBIS with digital movie stabilization set to high. This takes a more substantial crop and is really designed for filming when walking, so we'll come back to that. And for now, disable the digital movie IS altogether and have a look at IBIS plus the optional boost IS mode. This assumes that you're trying to hold the camera as still as possible, so snaps more into place after recomposing. It can be pretty effective as you can see here. But if you're more into walking while filming, here's the GH7 with the 12 to 60 at 12mm and absolutely everything turned on. So you're looking at IBIS, optical stabilization in the lens, and digital movie IS set to high here. I'm not walking particularly carefully, but there's still a nice floating look to the footage here. And just for fun, here's 2 vlogging clips for you, both filmed in open gate at 12mm with IBIS and optical, but the one on the left with standard movie IS, and the one on the right with high movie IS. Note the difference in the field of view. Moving on, the GH7 of course offers Vlog for grading, with Panasonic claiming 12 plus stops of dynamic range in standard modes, or up to 13 plus stops in a boosted DR mode up to 60 frames per second, which effectively combines 2 exposures. To see what's possible, here's a clip that I filmed with the standard profile where the high contrast has blown out some highlights and crushed some shadows, especially under the pier. Now let's open a wide dynamic range project in Final Cut and import some Vlog clips. Note that my screen recording here is in 8-bit, so the video preview in the top middle is going to look blown out. So I've turned on the video scopes in the upper left, which will indicate the tonal range, even when the preview to its right looks terrible. I'll start with that standard profile clip again, which the video scopes reveal has clipped highlights, and no amount of adjusting is going to bring them back, nor the detail in the shadow area under the pier. It's all gone. My second clip is filmed with Vlog, so right now it looks very flat. So the first thing to do is add the Panasonic Vlog LUT from the information panel. Now the colours look much more natural, while switching between it and the first clip shows greater tonal range, especially in the highlights. Again, my screen recording isn't showing the full range that I can see with my laptop actually in front of me, but hopefully you'll see that there is more tonal detail in the cloudy sky, even if just checking out the scopes in the upper left. Conversely, if we take a closer look at the shadow area and boost that part, you'll see how a lot of tonal detail is just waiting to be recovered at both ends of the range if desired. But the GH7 goes one step further still by offering internal ProRes RAW, so that's what I've used for my third clip, filmed in 5.7K, and in the information panel upper right you can see the ISO and white balance as recorded by the camera for this clip. You don't normally see this information. ProRes RAW on the GH7 is recorded in Vlog as standard, so let's first add the LUT before comparing it to the previous clip. Looking at the scopes, you may notice a slightly greater range to start with, but the preview window in the middle is also revealing the RAW clip capturing a wider field of view than the non-RAW clip before it. Just look at the edges. This is because it's not yet had a lens profile applied to correct the distortion, and this is one of the things that you're going to need to think about when filming RAW video. Likewise for noise reduction, which also needs applying to RAW video. But as before, there's still plenty of opportunity to adjust the tonal range, to retrieve highlight and shadow detail if desired. And finally, my fourth clip was again filmed in 5.7K RAW, but what's this? Whoops! I've accidentally filmed it with an incandescent white balance of 3200K rather than the correct daylight setting of 5500K. And once I apply the Vlog LUT, that strong blue cast is quite obvious. I've ruined everything, haven't I? But wait a minute, for RAW video you'll find a new Modify ProRes RAW button at the bottom of the information panel, and this then lets you adjust the white balance. You can see how adjusting it to 5500K effectively corrects this clip, but you can of course take it further in either direction if desired. You can also adjust the exposure offset and the ISO value to effectively adjust the brightness. Here, while the base sensitivity of Vlog is 500 ISO, I'll choose 1000. Then 2000 ISO to brighten the image to retrieve that shadow detail under the pier without even bothering with those colour wheels. Again, this all looks way better on my actual screen in front of me than this screen recording. Now, many higher end cameras already support RAW video output over HDMI, and this is also available on the GH7 if you prefer, but the ability to record ProRes RAW internally is much more convenient and a bit of a coup for Panasonic, as previously it had been tricky for various legal reasons. Maybe that's not so much the case anymore. Sticking with LUTs for a moment, the GH7 also supports the realtime LUTs and the Lumix Lab app, first seen on the recent full-frame S9. And like that camera, you can download LUTs or create your own via the app, then bake them into footage if you desire. Here's a clip I filmed with the included sample LUT, although if you'd like to learn more about the feature and how the phone app works, do check out my S9 review. And finally, hold on to your lunches as it's time for a rolling shutter test. Let's start with 4K 30p where there's minimal skewing, even as I throw the camera from side to side. Next, 4K 60, which again looks similar, so there's some skewing, but it's pretty minor. And now 4K 120, where again there's minimal impact from skewing. And finally in 5.8K open gate, where the skewing again looks pretty similar to those 4K clips. Overall, I'd say the GH7 does a pretty good job at keeping rolling shutter under control, particularly given that this is not even a stacked sensor. You'll really need to throw it around to notice it. Which brings me to my verdict, during which I'll show you some more samples. The Lumix GH7 builds upon a strong series to become one of the most powerful and compelling cameras for videographers and hybrid shooters at this price point. At first glance, it appears to resolve pretty much the only complaint of the earlier GH6 by equipping this otherwise excellent body with the G9 II sensor, which in turn finally brings confident face detect autofocus to the GH series. This alone will be all that many need to hear, but the GH7 also brings more to the table. It's one of the few cameras around that can record ProRes RAW internally up to 5.7K without the need for an external HDMI recorder. The optional XLR microphone interface now supports 32-bit flow audio, which is recorded directly into your files without needing to synchronize a file later. The AF subject recognition can now also drill down to target parts like the drivers of cars. The GH7 also inherits Frame I/O, proxy recording, and enhanced video stabilization from the latest S5.2 updates, along with real-time LUTs and compatibility with the Lumix Lab app from the S9. These all join a core feature set from the GH6, which includes 4K 120 with no loss of coverage or quality, the flexibility of 4x3 shaped open gate in 5.7K, a cunning screen tilting mechanism, external SSD support, and unlimited recording thanks to the built-in cooling fan. It seems almost churlish to complain you still can't use it as a standard USB webcam, but that's about the only obvious feature missing, and in some consolation you can still live stream direct from the camera without a computer in between. If you're into video and understand both the pros and the cons of Micro Four Thirds, you'll love the GH7, but also don't rule out the G9 II, available a little cheaper and sporting many of the same core features. If full frame's more your thing, then the S5 IIX actually comes in a tad less expensive than the GH7, and the standard S5 II even cheaper still. Now, neither sports the sheer wealth of GH7 features like internal ProRes RAW, but they may already be good enough for your needs. Certainly, I've been very happy filming most of my A and B roll for the past year with the S5 II, including this entire review. The bottom line, with the S5 II, G9 II and GH7, Panasonic has a trio of highly compelling cameras for hybrid shooters. Of course, the missing link now is a high-end full framer, and it'll be interesting to see if the GH7 body or feature set gives away any clues. But in the meantime, the GH7 is a tremendous camera, and once again proves Micro Four Thirds remains both relevant and desirable. Which brings me to the end of what turned out to be a somewhat longer video than I first anticipated. So if you got to the end, I salute you. And in the absence of a sponsor, all I have left to do is to thank you for watching, ask what you think in the comments, and bid you a fond farewell. Thanks again for watching. Bye bye.